Great. So I'm Lawrence. I'm Executive Director of Rethinking Economics International. We are an international membership body for young economists and anyone interested in changing economics. I'm kind of stunned by how beautiful this room is, actually. I don't know if anyone else has noticed it, but I really think it's quite, lucky to be sitting in here. So we've got about an hour and a half to talk about Simon Hanna's book. Simon Hanna is a writer, activist, and trade unionist living in South London. He's written several books, including A Party with Socialists in It, History of Labour Left, which was the Guardian book of the day, and today's book, Reclaiming the Future. So firstly, Simon, could you give us an overview of the book, maybe as well a bit about why you decided to write it, and maybe why it's different to your other books or any other intervention you've made in your working or activist or trade union life.
Thanks for that amazingly open-ended first question, which will allow me to say anything. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. It's really nice that you're interested in this topic and want to take part in a discussion around it. The idea of reclaiming the future. So my other books, I did a book on the poll tax. I've done a book on Lambeth, where I work, which is a borough in South London in the 1980s, which is quite a radical place. So I've done lots of kind of social history and history from below books, but for this one I wanted to write one which is a bit more about trying to imagine a world beyond capitalism. And so it starts from the idea that capitalism is not like some natural, inevitable, eternal way of organising our society. It's one we have at the moment. It's been around for about 200 or so years, like give or take. But it's not something that is permanent and enduring. And indeed, in the context of the climate crisis, it can't be permanent and enduring. I started to think about the idea of like late stage capitalism, where capitalism is so productive and so dynamic and so efficient at some aspects of the economy, it's just absolutely destroying the planet. And we have to question how much longer we think capitalism can survive in the current system, in terms of planetary boundaries, in terms of what the planet's going to look like in 20 years' time, 50 years' time, 100 years' time. Can we really imagine that all of this is going to be the way it is now with the current level of productivity and consumption and growth and so on? So the book is really about imagining a different way of organising society. It's not a model of how to organise that different society as such. It's more about kind of the principles of how we can move beyond market economics, the kind of anarchy of production and waste and constant exploitation and social hierarchies, we're always competing with each other, and people between different nations, men and women, different like ethnic groups, and we're divided and like we're fighting over sort of the means of living, whilst billionaires like Elon Musk and so on just live unimaginable wealthy lives. And so the book's really rooted in that kind of political discussion. It's a challenge to the idea that there was this writer a few years ago, Mark Fisher, talked about this idea of capitalist realism. Like it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. And I guess the point of the book is that those two things are now kind of collapsing into a singularity. Like the end of the world is also, sort of tied up with the destruction of capitalism. But can we go beyond that? Can we build a society which has the good life for everyone? So that's the basis of the book.
Great. And as you were speaking, I was noticing how much I like the cover and how it kind of
sun.
Yeah. So on the one hand, if you look at it, it looks like the sun is setting, and then if you look at the other way, the sun is rising. And I was wondering maybe if you could give us a little bit of an entry to how do we sunset capitalism, and how do we allow the sun to rise on post-capitalism?
Sunsetting capitalism is great. That's a great way of putting it. When Pluto were designing the book, I said stay away from lefty. I don't want any hammers and sickles or pictures of Marx or anything like that. Not that I'm like an iconoclast who says forget the past. I think it's really important that we look at previous attempts to get past capitalism and what was good and what was bad and why they didn't work, or like lessons. Like I don't think we should just completely reject what happened in the 20th century. There was lots of attempts by millions of people to try and build post-capitalist societies that ultimately didn't work. And obviously, so from the capitalist point of view, they're like, proof it will never happen. Obviously, the argument that I make in the book is, there will be constant attempts to get past capitalism all the time. And some of them might be small scale, some of them might be large scale, some of them might be global. It's not like it's a one and done deal, like you had your chance and that's it. There's always struggles and things emerging. And so I guess for me, the book is also rooted in the actual struggles that people have, that we are compelled to have in order to exist under the present system. So there's quite a few books about kind of post-capitalist economics where they just start from the idea that sort of we've already won, and then it's just a question of how do we, we have this planning committee and these talk to these, it's sort of, and I think there's a lot of use in that, because I think it's important to imagine how things might not just be run through pure market profit-driven economics. But I have a whole chapter in the book about the kind of social movements that, are being built and will continue to be built, and the way that we can try and radicalize some of those ideas. So I think housing is a really good example. There's constant issues with housing in this country. In countries all around the world, they have completely commodified or nearly completely commodified housing. Okay? Obviously, as someone on the left, I start from the idea that housing is an essential part of what it is to be human. You need somewhere to live. And therefore, if we see it as a right, something that should be understood, not as something that you buy so that you have more money when you sell it later, but as something that should be socially provided, that should be available to everyone. And so it's about all the struggles that are emerging around housing in this country and elsewhere, and then the kind of politics that we can think about. It's not just defensive politics about stopping evictions or stopping rent increases or stopping predatory behaviours by banks. It's about trying to establish a clear politics that we can all have about how it could be organised differently, which does start from an ideal of how it could be organised differently, which might at the moment sound ridiculous, it just sounds too far-fetched, sort of. But if we can establish that ideal of, say, housing as a social good that we should all have access to, then I think that that's an important way that we can begin to think about looking at sunsetting capitalism.
Mm-hmm. And I guess there's a question there about how do we establish that vision? And you talk about it in the book about how working people often have a low political horizon, staying on the same theme as the book cover. How do we widen the political horizon or widen what's possible?
Well, yes, in the chapter in the book where I talk about this, I talk about how people are often propelled into action around like single issue campaigns. I don't mean single issue campaigns in a negative or narrow way. People are, your local kind of water area where you like to go and walk on a Sunday, you like to go bird spotting, and it's nice and calming and relaxing, and suddenly they're going to build on it, they're going to develop it, and maybe they have to develop on it because there's 30,000 people on the local waiting list. And so, capitalism constantly creates these things where the thing that you want to protect, conflicts directly with other human beings who are struggling. There's no housing, for instance. So, and if you want housing, where are you going to build it? And there's all these arguments, but we don't really have any power over any of that. These things are decided either by kind of bureaucrats or sometime elected politicians who are often very close to business, or just businesses making these decisions. So I think one of the things I like to think about is how we can sort of generalise the consciousness around these things and try and link up struggles and link up ways of talking about it, which is why I think public forums are so important, where we can cut. So in Lambeth, where I'm based at the moment, there's £99 million of cuts going through the council. So I work at the council, work in the housing department. It's the biggest cut the council's ever had, bigger than any of the cuts we ever had under the Tories. Okay, the Labour government is continuing an austerity agenda, and so obviously there's issues the workers have. We're fighting to defend our jobs. There's going to be mass redundancies. We're fighting to defend local services that we provide for people. But rather than just having a kind of defensive struggle, stop this, halt that, we're organising a campaign with the local community around the idea of building a better Lambeth. What would it look like to you to live in Lambeth or Manchester or anywhere if it was fully funded? If you had all of the money that you needed, all of the resources that you needed for your local areas, what would it look like to not have to just constantly be fighting over scarcity and division, and well, you get this, that means you don't get this, and all the animosity and often hatred like that can build up. And I think reform is growing because, you know, they're winning the argument saying, well, asylum seekers and refugees are getting hotel rooms and you can't even get on the waiting list for the NHS, you know, so people have a very, you know, like scarcity mindset around it. So we're trying to have a positive discussion as workers from the council, but also through our trade unions with local residents. It's not just about the cuts to the local services. What would it look like for you? Civil planning, the environment, like anti-racist politics. Obviously, Lambeth is a very black borough, you know, with Brixton in it. And so it's about trying to kind of develop that imagination around things. So we're not just stuck in these almost siloed off struggles. I guess I don't have a magic answer to that, but that's what I think like we can try and look at a bit more.
And I guess that also kind of speaks to that, like, the sort of old age debate between reform and revolution, which you do touch on. And I just wonder, like, in what you discussed there, or what's within the book, how would the book help us navigate the challenge of when you're trying to change something in society, make systemic change, but falling maybe into the trap into just, you know, tinkering around the edges, making small few changes. Like some of these single issue campaigns, sometimes they can be really transformative and mobilise lots of people, but then other times they can be, you know, these small wins, and actually the sort of horizon for a better future then kind of seeps away with that. How does this book help us kind of navigate that debate between, like, reform, revolution?
Well, I guess keep an eye on the sunset, as you, or like an eye on the horizon, as you said. Like, I feel that the way capitalism society is going at the moment is downhill. I don't know if anyone's seen the news today, but you know, the people that are increasingly taking charge in governments around the world are very happy to tear everything down. They're very happy to absolutely gut everything that lots of people rely on. Obviously, welfare is a good example, but there's a whole range of things. Like because they have a view that the more they can destroy, then the more that sort of the billionaire oligarch class can then kind of, you know, bite what remains and enrich themselves. And like, it's about concentrating power and economics and wealth into a smaller and smaller group of people. And I think that is the direction of travel in the United States, which obviously has huge bearings on the rest of the world because the United States economy is the United States economy. But it's happening in other ways in other countries as well. And obviously that is what reform would try and do if they won an election in this country. It's also what the Tories have been doing anyway. It's not just a fringe right thing. This is kind of the direction of travel for increasingly mainstream politics, even some centre-left politics, I think you could argue. And so within that, I think, you know, there's going to be so many struggles. There's already so many struggles emerging. There's so many, you know, protests and campaigns. Obviously, we've had lots at the moment around solidarity with the Palestinians, but there's going to be an increasing number of things around issues where they will, I think, become explosive. I mean, the book that I did on the poll tax a few years ago, I don't know if anyone remembers the poll tax, some people might remember, mass non-payment campaign. People, you know, were just fed up. It led to a massive riot in Trafalgar Square. It helped bring down Thatcher. I just think that we'll see more and more things like that. And I guess within that, there's always a possibility for the capitalist class and their politicians to kind of try and shrink it and like buy it off, i.e. to give massive concessions as a temporary way of trying to stop it from radicalising. That is something that's happened historically. There's been quite a few movements which demanded quite radical things, and they ended up getting some of what they wanted, but in a way that we kind of controlled and contained. And I guess the point of the book is that with the climate crisis, in particular, unless we can move beyond capitalism as a profit-driven system, which requires growth and therefore is incompatible with life on a finite planet, then there is no future in that sense, or like there's a very bad future. And so I guess it's about trying to politicise and radicalise all those conversations that are happening, and trying to find ways to link them up, to consider how they can begin to move beyond, you know, so they're not just kind of campaigns that are fighting for, you know, sort of almost defensive struggles, although those are very important campaigns, but campaigns that can go on the offensive. Like, we should be demanding more from life. Like, you only get one life on this planet. Sorry, unless you believe in reincarnation, that's fine. But, you know, you you only get one life on this planet. You get 80 odd years or something like that, but like all we're used to at the moment is just things getting worse. Like there's this phrase "inshittification," which has become quite popular. It's not my sort of swearing. It's being filmed as well. But like it's the idea that everything's just worse, and like things aren't as good as they used to be. We've kind of got used to it. Like we don't really assume things are going to get better anymore. We just assume things are going to get worse. But I think that leads to a psychological space for humans, which is incredibly destructive and negative, and does lead to the growth of far-right organisations with very simplistic, hate-filled arguments about some people get this and therefore you don't get that. And so, yeah, like I think all these things need to be challenged, and we should be arguing for a good life. Like we have a system where we can, or we have enough production capacity to provide a good life for everyone on the planet. Capitalism can't do that. Capitalism can provide a good life for some people and a rubbish life for a great many other people, and an amazing life for a very small number of people. But we can produce a good life for everyone on the planet within planetary boundaries. There's this great concept, radical abundance. I don't know if people have heard of it. It's kind of this new kind of way of thinking about things, which I really like. It's the idea that if you had a post-scarcity, post-capitalist society, and you can fight for it now, by the way, but obviously it'd be much better in a society not dominated by profit. You can have a radical abundance, and a radical abundance is not stuff. It's not just consumable goods and things that get thrown away in the ocean. It's an abundance of time, an abundance of human connection, an abundance of playful, kind of erotic, ludic activity like culture. It's not like having to work 45 hours a week just to try and make ends meet at the end of the month. No, if we reduce the working week, if we spread out the work, if we improved transport, access to culture, if we improved our city centres, if we, there's so many things that we could do which would make life worth living and good for everyone. And I guess that's what I'm kind of thinking about, and that's what I'm interested in trying to make people think that life could be better, and it's not just constantly resisting things getting worse. I guess that for me is the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. And I'll ask one more question, and then maybe we'll open it up to the audience. And I guess it's interesting sitting here because I spend so much of my time asking questions to mainstream economists, and it's much less about the imagination of what could be. But if I was to try to take the position of a mainstream economist, I guess some of my questions about the radical abundance of this world that you're articulating is, what does that mean for local businesses, trade, restaurants, which I think you've got a section like.
Got a whole section on restaurants in the book. You weren't expecting that, were you?
And maybe like some of the anxieties, or maybe some of the lack of imagination comes from not being able to see what your working life, the most of your life, ultimately, would look like in this new world. Yeah.
So, I think there's two things. One is the left has to do a lot of work to convince people that it won't be like the Soviet Union in the 1970s again. I think that is still, even if you were born in the 90s or the noughties or something, and after it collapsed, I still think it's kind of there. The idea that life is just like drudgery under like a policeman, and everything's being recorded, and if someone overhears you say something like critical of the government, you get whisked away. Which, by the way, is kind of happening now into capitalism. So let's not just imagine it happened under that society. I think the left has a lot of work to do to to say why that happened, what was bad about it, how it should be different next time, how everything is based not just on someone coming up with an ideal plan that is then just implemented, but everything is based on economic conditions, political conditions, global things, what you can try and make happen or not. And so I think that's an important challenge to people kind of feeling a bit sort of nervous about those things. The reason why I have a whole section in the book on will there be restaurants under socialism? And I put that in because there was a big row on Twitter, I refuse to call it X, a couple of years ago, where it was like left Twitter, and someone was like, will there be restaurants under socialism? And some people said yes, and these people came and said like, no, of course there won't be. There will be state-mandated canteens, and and I just thought, oh God, that sounds really bad. Sort of like, well, I mean, I think state, run canteens. Oh, obviously, sorry, the idea of the state is a much more democratic, egalitarian state than existed previously. I have to make that point. But the idea of like community collective-run canteens for people to go and get cheap food is a great idea. They used to have that in France. Like they have the old model in France of different kind of canteens, or like the milk bars in kind of Eastern Europe and things. I think those are good things, but I think there should also be space for human creativity. If you're a great chef and you've got a great idea for a great sort of cuisine restaurant or something like that, there will be space in any democratically planned economy for you to be able to explore that vision. There will be a chance for you to, if you're like really like if you have talents in any way, like there will be like spaces that can be provided in order to make sure that you get a chance to do those things. It's capitalism that doesn't allow most people to do those things. I think that has to be the challenge. We have to challenge this view, put about by the billionaire class, that capitalism is great because any old entrepreneur in their garage soldering away with a motherboard, making whatever they want to make, can sort of become a billionaire. Some of them did, but most people. You have amazing ideas, but there's no money. Like you can't afford it. Can you get these startup capital? Will the bank give you a loan for your small business based on your rates of return? Most people can't even navigate that process, let alone become successful in it. So I really again want to challenge this kind of common sense view that capitalism is this amazing thing because it's so fluid and dynamic. And like for most people, it's not. It's it is for some people, but for most people, it's not at all. It's kind of drudgery. It's failure. 9 out of 10 small businesses collapse in the first 2 years of being set up in Britain. Like even though they get loads of like grants and like tax rebates from the government, like setting up a small business in Britain is like a bad idea. Whereas I think under a democratic planned economy, you can have more flexibility. But these will also be collectives. They won't be like things that privately enrich people. Beyond sort of obviously if we've abolished money or not. But yeah, like it won't be a thing where you can become a super rich, sort of like Jamie Oliver type chef, for instance. But it will be a place where your creativity can flourish and you can serve nice food to lovely people. And I think we need to kind of like defend that vision as part of the good life.
Great. Maybe this is a good chance now to open up to questions. Maybe we'll take one or two at a time. So one there.
Thanks for that intro. I suppose as somebody that hasn't read it yet, the obvious question is, what is your pathway to this new economy? You say you don't want to start from like, oh, it's already been done, this is how we do it, but do you actually talk about how we get from where we are now to this possibility?
Yes.
Well, we talked a little bit about the sun setting on capitalism, but it sort of seems to me that, broadly speaking, whenever capitalism is in crisis, generally the right are always much better at kind of capitalising on that opportunity than the left. So I suppose my question is, how if this isn't too difficult a question, how do we stop that from happening this time? And why is it that the right is usually so much better at kind of seizing that opportunity?
Sort of similar tones in those questions. Do you want to take them?
Anyone else, or is it just going to be two? I don't mind.
Should we go with one?
I was quite struck by the themes you had around sort of silos, and I'm a policy academic by background. I've also worked in the public sector, so when you were talking about almost this fighting line by line in a budget, sort of taking it, and then also I think from an academic perspective, it feels like there's still a real divide between what I would consider to be the number crunching economists and then sort of your qual social scientists. That's what I am. I'm like the fluffy qual person, and I work in a supposedly multidisciplinary research team at one of the biggest universities in the country that's supposed to be sharing those ideas, but it still feels like there's a silo between the number crunching side and the social side. And I'd just be interested in your reflection to sort of overcoming that silo work, and I guess to do some of that bigger picture imagination ideas, but that's backed up with evidence and the numbers to support it. I don't know, you might have some reflections on that as well.
Do you want to take that?
Yes, okay. So what I love about doing a book like this is, because I've done several book talks on it, and very quickly you get to sort of people saying like, all very well and good, but what's the strategy to make it happen? I'll be honest, I mean, I've got ideas in there, but yeah, like if I knew an absolute concrete fail-safe strategy to make it happen, I probably would start making money out of it. Does that sound bad or wrong? I don't know. Like, shouldn't I make money? Anyway, whatever. So yes, all I can say is that, and I say this in the book, you know, we live in a society which is riddled with antagonisms and contradictions, and the way things are going now, especially with the climate crisis, I think there's going to be more and more social explosions. There's going to be more and more polarization, and I think so there's a big debate on the left now. Like if you're on the more kind of radical socialist left, I think the last US election is a really good example. Sort of Trump's probably going to win. There isn't really a left candidate. Do you back the Democrats? Do you back like Kamala Harris? And within that, there's a very meaningful debate. I mean, it's obviously Kamala Harris in large part lost because millions of people didn't vote for her. They voted for Biden before. Not for her. Large part of that was probably to do with Gaza and what was going on there. And people just saying, obviously they hate Trump, but they wanted to draw a line somewhere. And other people saying like, what are you doing? You know, sort of, you're going to let Trump in. You know, sort of. So like, there's very real live debates about if the liberal centre is collapsing, but it's being replaced by the far right, is the socialist left job to kind of prop up the liberal centre. And you know, I've got like some views on that, but like we are in a polarizing society, and I think one of the things the left needs to do, even if you do tactically vote for a really horrible right winger just to stop an even more horrible right winger from getting elected, the left has to maintain a vision of a different world. You have to maintain a vision that we're not just here to defend liberal capitalism, how it's emerged over the last like so many decades. We have to be clear that even if we're defending the limited gains of the post-war era, and there's been significant gains for women, for ethnic minorities, for sexual, you know, for LGBTQ people, absolutely, and all those are under threat now. But is our job just to like defend them, or are we arguing for a better society in which these things aren't even challenged or under threat anymore? So I guess the argument within the book is that there will be these struggles. These struggles are already happening now. And yeah, the left has to be a bit more brave, a bit more courageous, has to be much better organised. I think some people on the left have to get off of social media and get out into the real world, actually try and organise in their communities a bit more. And I'm not having a go like some people can only do that, which is fine. But Malcolm X had that great quote where he said, like, we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organised. And I think I still kind of really believe that. So yeah, like I think that's the thing. Like I don't really have a magic strategic answer to these things, but they're all of the struggles that are going to emerge over the next few years. It's just about being involved in them, not trying to hijack them, but being supportive, being part of those struggles, and being clear about an alternative vision, which is one of a better society, and yeah, like how we can get there, how we can try and create more participatory democracy in local areas. So how can we try and overcome sort of some of the limitations of democracy at the moment? Like what are the proposals we can have? I'm quite interested this year is like COP30 is happening this year. It's the 30th COP. Which is the Conference of Parties about trying to stop climate change. More carbon has been released into the atmosphere since COP started than before. COP has failed on its own terms instead of trying to even slow down climate change, let alone stop it. So this COP30 process this year is a big one. The theme of this year's COP is just transitions. It's an eco-socialism. Like, just transition. Now you're talking my language. How can we sort of begin to maybe I'll send them a copy of my book. Maybe they'll read it. I don't know. So there's opportunities there. So one of the things that I'm involved in discussing about is say climate assemblies. Climate assemblies up and down the country. Every town, every city, every village has a climate assembly. Book a meeting hall, put out leaflets and posters, get people together and talk about the climate issue and talk about possible solutions to the climate issue. Try and link up some of these concerns that we have around a number of other issues. Low wages, bad housing, problems around racism. Can we try and amalgamate those things and try and bring them into greater kind of conversation with each other? So yeah, again, it's not a perfect strategy, but I guess those are the kind of things that we can try and think about. Maybe that links to your thing about trying to overcome some of the policy divisions. Just a very final thing on the gains of the right. I mean, I guess the problem is that the right always cut with the grain of society in terms of the common ideas. Like, they take it to its much further conclusion. But I mean, Reform does well because Reform effectively has like 6 daily newspapers. I mean, everything, and like you know, the Sun, the Daily Mail, the Star, like all those newspapers, you know. And then obviously Farage just gets up and says, "Well, you know about the asylum seeker crisis, don't you?" And people are like, "Yes, I do, because I read it in the tabloids," you know, or they've seen it on social media. And so they have this huge ideological apparatus that kind of really backs them and supports them. Obviously, the left doesn't really have that. I mean, the socialist left doesn't, you know, Guardian, I'm not sure, sort of. So like in that sense, people are much more primed to accept right-wing ideas. I don't think that's automatic, though. I don't think it always happens. It doesn't always have to be like that. I think people are sort of a bit more susceptible to that because that's kind of what you're used to. And I think, yeah, like they obviously have easy solutions. You know, as I said about the asylum seeker thing, I think that's because like I see it all the time. And they say, so just very quickly, I went to this thing up in Northborough 2 years ago. It was a celebration of Elizabeth Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell's wife. She's buried there in this local church. Anyway, I went up there, and it was like a sealed knot thing. There was people dressed up as English Civil War, like soldiers. It was very geeky. I loved it. And I was there with a friend, and we were, and because it was the women that kind of in the local church, the local primary school, and they were like, "You come up from London?" And we were like, "You come up from London?" It was kind of, we weren't treated like royalty, but they were quite intrigued we come up from London for this little village thing. And we were chatting with them, and they were very friendly. And then we overheard 2 of the women who worked in the local primary school just talking to themselves, and it was around the time when all that stuff about rack concrete was going on, you know, the aerated concrete, and it was like, the school's going to fall down, hospitals are going to fall down, and the 2 women, they were very, you know, nice women, but they were like, "Oh, yeah, it's a real problem, isn't it? But like, we spend £9 million a week on hotels for asylum seekers, don't we? And if we didn't do that, if we just got rid of them, then we'd have £9 million a week to spend on our primary schools and like on our hospitals." You know, and in a very simple way, that's like, well, yeah, like if you literally see it in those resource-driven scarcity, who gets what terms, yeah, that makes complete sense. But obviously the left are talking about a radical reorganisation of society for the benefit of everyone. The right have a very simple message. Well, these people are getting like these hotel rooms, and, you know, so I think the left needs to do more work around trying to get those good, easy kind of arguments as well that also connect with people's concerns, their doubts, their fears, but doesn't throw all the blame on you know, a very marginalised, persecuted group of people, which I guess is probably like where the wealth tax, I think, is a good one. I mean, obviously the post in this book go far beyond the wealth tax, but yeah, I mean, there's agitation going on from like Gary Stevenson and people like that around the wealth tax. That's great. I mean, because it puts the ball in their court. Like, why aren't you paying more tax? You know, you're billionaires. You should be paying more tax, you know, so or they might leave the country. It's like, that's not very patriotic, is it? I thought they were meant to be, you know, great, you know, whatever, and then they're going to go off and be, you know, taxed, you know. So, like, I think, and that leads to the point I was saying before about kind of offensive slogans and demands. It's not just stop the cuts, halt this. Like, yeah, like there should be a wealth tax, you know, there should be a mass campaign. We should go and have a demonstration now. We should go and have a wealth tax, you know, sort of like, and I think that's the kind of thing that begins to shift the conversation a little bit, which is what I think we need to try and do more of.
Great. Should we take another round of questions?
Such an interesting topic. I mean, it is about life, isn't it? You know, it is many dimensions. I'm just trying to pick on an aspect of you know, things you've touched upon. I mean, democracy, for example. I mean, do people really know what democracy is? We bandy this word around, you know, very liberally. I don't think people do. What is it? People think, oh, it's the House of Commons or something like that. Well, it's something to do with it. But I mean, the idea of democracy is that, you know, we involve and engage and consult. You know, you touched upon it in what you've said. We have a huge lack of engagement, consultation. I mean, if we want to change things, then we've got to engage with people. We've got to bring them into the debate, bring them into the movement, you know, get them motivated to want to change things for the better. But how do you do that? Well, you've got to engage, you've got to consult. And we have a political system that calls itself democratic, that really, most of the time, fails to consult, fails to engage. And if truth be told, I mean, I think really, I've lived a while, And I take a keen interest in our political life. But what I see is that we only have what we might think about as a democracy on one day every few years. That's election day. Outside of that, forget it. And if we want to, it's about the distribution of power. You know, most of us have, because of the lack of engagement, the lack of consultation, the lack of being brought into the political life of the country, it's the failure of the distribution of power to be an even one. You know, it's grossly uneven.
So
In fact, I I'd just go so far as to say
Yeah.
controversially, if we can just end here, because I'm not going to go on and on too. But, you know, my developing view as I've got older is that more and more we actually live in a dictatorship, and we always have been for a long, long time. You know, it's the dictatorship of the cabinet cabal. Even the people who we elect, you know, we elect through the democratic process on that election day, when we create politicians, the people who do our politics, who carry out, we invest with the power to affect and influence and change for better or for worse our lives.
Just to sum up to the question.
Disenfranchised.
Yeah.
And you know, we've got to do something about that, because you know, even the people we elect, our MPs, you know, ultimately when push comes to shove, they're powerless too. They're bullied by the parliamentary whips into doing what the cabinet cabal, the dictating cabal wants to happen. That goes for all parties, you know, it isn't
Yeah.
a late thing.
So I guess the question is around like what does democracy look like? How do we be more democratic now, considering the major democratic
It's in a
deficit?
pretty bad state, let's put it like
Yeah.
that, I think, you know, and
Definitely.
this theme is such an important one, you know, it's about creating a better life for the people who, you know, have a pretty awful life at the moment.
Yeah.
You know,
Great.
moral compass.
I'll just stop you there.
Yeah,
So we can get
sorry,
around to the other questions.
I'll run with it.
No.
Good questions.
Matt?
So my question was actually similar about the nature of democracy, but I was kind of thinking from a slightly different perspective. And I was kind of thinking, obviously you've mentioned democracy throughout grassroots organisation and things like that, but what happens if the grassroots thing kind of go against what the kind of vision that's been mentioned in the book? Don't open up. People might not agree with what you're saying, and what do we think about that? How yeah.
Great. Do you have another one? This moment.
It's kind of
I
linked.
just wanted just to say quickly, I was just looking at something on my phone. So when you first started talking, you made me think of something I studied many years ago, Voltaire's Candide, and I'll say it now because you mentioned some of this stuff. And he was mocking philosophers at the time, you know, who were saying it's the best of all possible worlds.
Yeah, Dr.
And perhaps
Pangloss.
if you believe in God, you know, get it, but and it was the utopia word was used in the book. And I'm thinking, have we come very far from those, 17th century days? There's much change. I'm sure it has, but intrinsically regarding happiness and damage to the planet or whatever, and inequality and so on, how far have we come?
Great. So those are three really great questions. So one on democracy, democratic deficit, another on working with communities, and then how far have we come? Like, are we just repeating ourselves?
Yeah. So I've got a great Oscar Wilde quote at the beginning of the book, which I'm going to use to try and furnish my own intellectual projections. So Oscar Wilde said, "A map of the world that does not include utopia is not worth even glancing at, for it leaves out the one country at which humanity is always landing." And in that quote, in that wider conversation, he's talking about, yes, the humans striving to try and kind of create things better. Like, generally speaking, not everyone, obviously most of us most of the time are just going to work and living our lives and whatever, but there's a general push to try and improve things. But obviously under capitalism, the problem is that is always frustrated and blocked, because you only get so far, because the class interest under capitalism will always prevent it from being properly, the value, the goods, the things that we make from being properly distributed, because of all the reasons I go to in the book. So I think it's important. I mean, obviously, I don't like using the word utopia because it's associated with like fictions that will never happen. Like that's utopian. But I do like the idea of like maybe a small scale utopia. Like why can't we imagine a better world? Like why don't we like kill that thing inside of our head that's like, oh, it'll never get any better? And I think that also links in the book, which I think links with your question. There is no perfect society. There's no perfect model. And in this book, I make the point that, again, it's not a model or so, but like even if you implemented a lot of the principles that I outline in this book, it would not create a perfect society. There would still be disagreements. There would still be debates over resources. There would still be, different advocacy, different groups wanting to do things. But it's about, can we create mechanisms where we can resolve these disagreements in ways which are democratic, which are plausible, which are sovereign, where we feel like self-actualization as human beings? Because at the moment, if we have disagreements between things, the only way to resolve them, there's not many. I mean, there's market economics, like maybe a business will fail or people will just be, I guess a really good example obviously is the pipeline in the United States, where the local indigenous community was fighting against it. They didn't want this horrible polluting pipeline to go through, and obviously the oil company did, and there was the US government sent in National Guard and police to beat up all the and now Greenpeace is being sued for hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue. Like all of that is just capitalism, isn't it? Like all of that is just, and like the only thing you can use to stop it is just literal protest and putting your bodies in front of bulldozers and getting whacked by policemen's batons or, going to prison for like 5 years, and so like there must be a better way. There must be a better way of organising, like kind of, if you do have disagreements over how resources are being used or whatever. So and that does link in with the idea of more democracy. So Pat Devine wrote a book in 1988 called Democratic Economic Planning. He has a model he calls negotiated coordination. And he says any post-capitalist society will not be, a one-party dictatorship, or rather, it shouldn't be a one-party dictatorship. But there will be, there'll be a central planning authority which should be democratically elected. There will be still be trade unions. Workers will still have interests, even under like an eco-social society. Different groups of workers might have different interests over where work is or not, for instance. There will be local campaign and interest groups. There will be environmental campaigners still under eco-socialism, because you'll need to be able to advocate for things. Like it's not there will be a perfect plan of everything. There will still be potential contradictions, but it's about trying to work those way out in a much more democratic way rather than the way that is currently not worked out. So I guess that's So read the book for more on that. And just your point on democracy, I think it's really important. Again, it's one of the things we need to challenge. We don't live in a democracy, really. I mean, it has some democratic elements, but, Elon Musk bought the last year's presidential election. I mean, he pumped money into the richest man in the world, pumped as much money into the Trump campaign as was needed. Trump won the election, and now he's, tearing apart the federal kind of government, the welfare programs, the Department of Education's gone, that's, and there's nothing you can do until there's another election in 4 years' time. Obviously, that's not true. There's loads of things you can do, but, like the Democrats, we lost the election, so I guess, that's it now, but yes, I think we live under a dictatorship of capitalism, and the choices that we have from politicians, like even the Labour Party, you can read more on that in my book on the Labour Party, but even the Labour Party, obviously I'd much rather a Labour government, generally speaking, than a Tory government, absolutely. But Labour's social welfare programme, its mixed economy, like in the post-war period under Attlee, that was just to keep capitalism going, really. I mean, there was like collapsing industries that were very important, like railway and coal and things like that. And British businesses still needed it, so they nationalised them, ran them under government kind of bureaucratic control, set up the NHS. Healthcare is important. You've got to get your workers patched up, get them back into work the next day, And so it's not like these were fundamental challenges to capitalism. These things help sustain capitalism, for like decades afterwards. So I think there's a radical critique. Again, I'm not saying, therefore I don't care about the NHS. The NHS is great. I'm glad we have these reforms, but the idea that these are alternatives to capitalism, I think we need to be a bit more critical around, because ultimately they're there to ensure the fundamental exploitation of humans carries on. That's also true in local government where I work. What does local government do? It does children's social care, it does adult social care, it collects your bins, it fixes potholes in the road, it maintains the park so you can go there and have a nice, clear your head if you're having a stressful day at work. Local government is there to ensure the social reproduction of the population. And good, I'd much rather we did that than didn't do it. But it's not like an island of socialism in a kind of capitalist world in that sense. It is integrated into the needs of capital to make sure that people are socially reproduced. So again, I think we can have quite radical, quite exciting arguments around those things that can make people think that, well, actually, yeah, I mean, maybe actually we could do more than this. Maybe we could go beyond. Not just defending the post-war social democratic order. Maybe there's more radical things that we can do. But just a final thing on democracy. I mean, I think lots of people actually are turning away from democracy and supporting strongman authoritarians. I think in large part because of neoliberalism and austerity. I think for years it didn't really matter, really, if you voted for the right or the left in terms of conservatives or social democrats. They would both implement austerity. They would both carry out privatisations. I'm not saying there was no policy differences, but the policy differences were so narrow in the world of neoliberalism, it just turned people off of politics. What's the point in voting? And you hear that all the time. Millions of people don't vote, they can't be bothered. And then you get a strong man like Trump emerge who literally says, vote for me and you'll never have to vote again. Do you remember that when he said that for the election? Vote for me and you'll never have to vote again. What does that mean? People are like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. I don't want to waste, So again, and I think your contribution was useful in that sense because, I think genuine democracy is where people are engaged because they know that there's a difference. If you look at voting patterns in the 50s and 60s, when there was a difference between Labour and the Tories, there was quite significant difference over the way the welfare state was going to be maintained or whatever. People did vote. Voting was much higher, but then as soon as kind of Thatcher in the 90s and then Blair and now Starmer, you can see interest draining out of the political kind of discourse, and that does create space for strongman authoritarian and even in some cases strong women authoritarian figures like Le Pen in France and Meloni in Italy and so on, who kind of rise above the political morass and sort of promise national renaissance and salvation. And people are like, yeah, sure, that sounds great, because the mainstream parties sound awful. So again, we have to challenge all of these things, I think.
Great. I have another question actually, which is kind of connected to this shift that you're talking about. So we had the kind of Keynesian turn to maintain capitalism post-war. We've then had the neoliberal turn to basically undo all that, free up capital, sell off land. And I guess there's an argument now that we are seeing the sunset of neoliberalism. And you kind of maybe spoke to a bit of that. But I guess what does this book, or what are your thoughts on this kind of emerging world that we're moving into? So, a multipolar political system where there are, we're not just under complete American dominance, or maybe that's being challenged at the moment, but also anti-globalization with the growth of trade taxes, the trade war that's ongoing. And I guess maybe from my position, I'm asking this because, I spend a lot of time with mainstream economists, and I think...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess the most telling moment, I think, in that time was when inflation happened and no one could really explain it.
Mm.
And now, when no one really knows actually how the trade war is going to end, whether that's going to lead to more inflation, less inflation, growth, low growth. It seems to have split across mainstream economics, not just the left.
Yeah.
So I guess what can we, is this a crisis? Can we act on it? Or is this a different part of capitalism, and therefore what should we be thinking about?
Gosh. Okay. I mean, yeah, that's. I guess that's a bit outside of the remit of the book, in the sense of, like the kind of the arguments the book is making about moving past kind of capitalist society, and trying to imagine how things could be differently. But I mean, yeah, I guess in the most general sense, we're in a period of chaos. The whole post-war era is being upended. It's incredibly unpredictable. The tariffs, I mean, I don't know what impact they're going to have, but they might cause inflation. That's what people are saying. But obviously, I think it's a return to the 1800s in a sense. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now. Okay, sorry, let me collect my thoughts. Right. The post-war era, as we understand it, the 1940s to the 1970s, whatever, that was the aberration. That was the blip. Okay? Now, I think the problem is lots of people look at that and they think that's what capitalism is. It's a nice mixed economy, welfare state. We need to go back to that. Okay? That was the aberration. That came about because of a particular arrangement of class forces after World War II, the Atomic Age. There's this MP, Quentin Hogg, who was a Tory MP in Britain in the 1940s, and he said he was very buoyed, armed conscripted army. After World War I, there was, the Russian Revolution. There was a massive revolution in Germany and other places. They were generally concerned. There was a mutiny in the British Army in Egypt and other places, and so they were generally concerned. All these people are going to be coming back with guns. What are we going to do? Quentin Hogg said, if we don't give them reforms, then they'll take revolution. And I think that really set in motion, the implementation of the Beveridge Report around the ills of society, the welfare state, and so on. Now, they're not scared about that anymore. They're not scared about people rising up, protests and whatever, but they're not really, the people in power aren't really scared, anymore about losing everything. And so now I think they're just tearing all that up. They don't care about it anymore. I think we've had two kind of counter-revolutionary phases. The first one was the kind of Thatcher-Reagan one. That began the process of undoing the economic gains of the post-war period. That was largely successful, privatisation and so on. Now we're in the second phase where the next generation of authoritarian right-wing politicians are undoing the social gains. So the gains for women, unheard of things, like J.D. Vance, the vice president, before the election, was literally calling into question, women's right to vote based on whether they had children or not. That was mainstream discourse in the United States. That was in the newspapers. That was literally a legitimate thing you can talk about now. Women with no children maybe shouldn't have any votes because they have no investment in the future. And if you have more children, maybe you should get more votes. If you have 5 children, maybe you can get 5 votes. Because, there was literally a weird transactional thing around whether you had children or not. That was a mainstream conversation now. They are really pushing everything. They are tearing up everything that was even good about the 20th century and kind of going back to bully boy, might makes right, powerful nations with powerful armies fighting off against each other. Obviously in Trump's mind, the world only really exists in terms of United States, Russia, and China, and therefore small countries like Ukraine and whatever. Who cares? They're just the things that you trade or the things that you use on the negotiating table. No interest in people, no interest in what's actually going on. And I think that's the world that they're creating. And you can see this unholy alliance of the richest people in the world with some of the most right-wing people in the world forming these incredibly powerful authoritarian voting electoral machines. And Elon Musk wants to use his money to fund the far right in Britain, fund the far right in Germany. You can see this kind of, force growing around the world where, they want to undo all of these, as I said before, gains, but, in some senses limited gains. And I guess limited in the sense now they're being called into question. I mean, we probably, a lot of us probably had, it's called the Whig view of history, where you kind of things just kind of getting better, and there's some setbacks, but things are generally getting better for people. Now, we're going to still have gay marriage. We transgender rights are under attack everywhere. I just think everything is now being called into question. And I guess that's really what's at stake. So I don't really know that much about the economics in terms of how the tariffs are going to play out. There's economists who earn 5 times my local government wage who also don't know how it's going to work, I guess. But I guess we're just in an age now where, I'll just finish on this. Trump is apparently using the tariffs and the threat of tariffs to force policy changes in countries. So what he's saying is, I will not impose tariffs on your country as long as you allow free speech. And by allow free speech, he means get rid of hate crimes around racism, whatever. Like he is, bullying, forcing kind of weaker, smaller countries, which is really everyone, to change their laws to allow the far right to grow, to extend their arguments, in return for having tariffs on steel removed or something like that, or like reduced. I mean, it's a real, the whole post-war order of states working together is, like it's collapsing. So yeah, I guess we'll do something about it. I'm not sure.
Great. More questions from the audience? Yes, we've got one.
Yeah, I've got a question. Kind of wanting to get back a bit to the economy and business, because I'm thinking whether you see a chance of business and trading itself contributing to change. So the way I'm thinking is, or something that I'm seeing is that there's lots of little experiments going on for where people are trying to generate new ways of production, kind of localized, decentralized, aligned with nature. I'm thinking of all these experiments that are going on in relation to flax and growing, bringing a localized, decentralized textile industry back here to the UK, and kind of seeing trading and business as an area of practice and reproduction of life, and whether there's a chance that these kind of attempts also contribute to larger changes, or whether you see a potential there, or is that part of your book as well?
Great. Any more questions? Yes, in the back.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on the organisational structure of the stock market?
My word.
Could you add some more context to that question for everyone in the room?
Right, so there's this huge financial apparatus that has vast amounts of influence over everything, and there's often a problem of whose fault or whose responsibility is what are the outcomes or externalities of given enterprises. So I'm sort of trying to understand the stock market myself, not to invest in it, more to understand whether it can have positive externalities. Can our public goods consonant with the stock market as it stands? Because, for example, since the 1950s, the Conservative Party has been advocating for shareholder democracy, as they euphemistically call it. So if I buy a share in a company, the idea is that I have agency over said company, because I can go along to a stockholders meeting and put in my thoughts. But I'm not really convinced that that's agency, nor that if I own an enterprise somewhere far away, that I'll know the conditions of the workers or the effects on the locale where it's put in operation. The corporation is quite a very interesting book of film. So there's really, is that enough context?
That's enough context. Yes. Not too dissimilar to the question from the previous one.
They're good at grouping your questions. This is really good. There was democracy in the last one.
Yeah.
And
We've got one more question here.
I mean, this is coming from my perspective, so I am self-employed. So in terms of how I would cost my day, if I were to half day or a full day, is dependent on financial year, how many hours, if I'm working more plus 1 day and then 2 days or a day and a half. I talk to people, and depending where they are in the country, their rates vastly different. I work in the photography and videography, and there are people that I talk to who work in London, their rates for a whole day, I would tell them, well, this is how much I charge to work in Manchester. Someone would say, well, that's how much I would charge to work in London, but not in Manchester. I would charge I think £100 off that. And so to me, if I'm not increasing my rates, I'm falling behind. I'm potentially not losing work, because it tends to be now that more people, I guess, more people have access to technology. Now phones can shoot 4K video as well as DSLR cameras, so you're competing with people who are charging less, but then you're also competing with yourself, because you're thinking, should I be charging more? Because if I'm not, am I shooting myself in the foot? Am I going to be able to pay this rent, mortgages or rent that goes up every year, or council tax that's going up? All these things that you have to think about. And I would love if, say a standard day rate in my industry was the same across the board, and that businesses and individuals would respect that. But you have people that will often say to me, well, we can't afford that, so for a standard day, I would say £750, and they'll say, well, can you do that for £300? That's an 8-hour working day. And then sometimes that isn't travel, or if I'd stay overnight. So it's it's ethically, it's very difficult to justify, well, do I want there to be a standard? Like, I would agree it'd be great if, how I have to invest in myself for equipment, equipment that I use. By most brands like Sony, Canon, they update it sometimes less than a year, cameras, everything. And people expect you to come out, to have invested into that and to bring that to a client. So if you have kind of some thoughts on that, it'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, so I guess we are continuing with the theme. So what can businesses do? What can we do with the stock market? And maybe something around the transitioning into this post-capitalist world. What's that mean for self-employed people, and the morality of I guess just trying to survive actually.
Yeah. Okay. Great questions. Okay, so I'll be precise. I mean, in your situation, it sucks because we are unless you are independently wealthy, you have to sell your labour on the market. You have to find a buyer, i.e., a boss or a client who's willing to pay for it. You compete with other people for work. And there's a constant thing of driving down wages, trying to improve efficiencies, and it's capitalism. I mean, it's a brutal system of exploitation, and but I mean, also from the perspective of some of your clients who are asking you to work much less money, I guess maybe they also have less money. I'm not trying to justify them ripping you off, but everyone's got a bit less money, so you try and pass it on, and I mean, it's just not a good system. It's not a good way of living, and it was kind of things like that when I was writing the book, and so the first chapter is about how capitalism functions and how all these problems keep on coming up all the time. And so the first chapter really does deal with those kind of just how we are exploited as people, and we're never paid the full value of our work. And it's a precarious life that we live, and so can we kind of start with something better from that? The point you made about the Sony was updating their cameras is a great example of built-in obsolescence.
Yes.
Capitalism is wasteful. This is the point. It is, we've all got mobile phones. When you get a software update, it downloads kind of programs in the back of the phone, which
it's voiding those updates if you have an earlier version.
Yeah, no, exactly. It downloads things in the operating software which burn through your battery more quickly. So you're since I got this new thing, my battery runs out. You have to get a new one. Because why? Because there was this movie that came out a few years ago in the 50s. It's an Alec Guinness movie called The Man in the White Suit, I think it's called. And he's this textile guy. He invents this suit that doesn't break, never gets dirty. And so they try and kill him. The family people are because it's he's you're going to ruin our profits. We've got to, clothes have to break, they have to fall apart, or phones have to break or fall apart because you've got to keep the shareholders happy. So yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say. I mean, like, I think in terms of your thing, I mean, I very much encourage self-employed people to kind of get with other people and kind of form their own kind of cooperatives. You know, you can try and set wages, you know, rather than competing with each other. I gave this talk in a town outside of London a few years ago, and there was a Labour council came along, and she was like, you know, because obviously we're talking about racism and stuff, and she said, I hear what you're saying, Simon, there's a very real problem in this town because we have a lot of plumbers, and they're all being driven out of business by Polish plumbers, and Romanian plumbers are coming in, and, you know, and I was just like, well, sure, but this is the horrible competition, you know, that you have, you know, like, why don't all the plumbers form a business together and rather than competing, they can try and share out, like, I know it sounds a bit, you know, utopian, but like, you don't have to compete. You don't have to compete with each other. You know, you can set up things. So, and again, that's maybe, you know, some of the things we can try and think about rather than the way it currently is at the moment. Just very quickly on kind of almost like eco businesses or like alternative businesses or businesses that are doing more sustainable things. Yeah, sure, absolutely. You know, I guess the point I'm making in the book is that there's only so far you can go, in a sense, I think, even with ethical businesses, because the more you scale up, well, like, there's two problems. One, you are competing in the marketplace with unethical businesses. And like, there's been lots of, say, cooperatives, for instance, where they start off very ethical, they pay good wages, they have good working conditions. There's that company in Spain, Mondragon, which is like the world's biggest cooperative. It employs thousands of people. But it has to compete. I can't remember what Mondragon does. Sorry, but like, it does a thing, but they end up competing with capitalist businesses who are much more vicious with their workers. They drive down their costs. You know, like, their workers don't enjoy the same level of, you know, benefits, and then they pass it on to the consumer to undercut competitive rivals, as the nature of capitalism. So Mondragon now has had to change its constitution, where everyone who's become an employee after a certain date has worse wages. That's not part of the thing. That's not what they wanted to do, but they are compelled by the logic of the market to do that. And again, that, like, so I think I think it's great if people want to set up things and try and do like positive things and sell more ethical goods. I really don't have a problem with that. But I guess it's very hard at the beginning with the competition, and then if you scale up more and more, then that kind of sometimes poses other problems in terms of the scalability, like whether you can maintain that kind of ethical kind of grounding, I guess. So I do talk about it in the book a little bit, but I don't want to like be down on anyone trying to do a good thing. But I guess my point is that as long as we have capitalism, we will always have that profit-driven thing, which the Body Shop, Anita Roddick, from a few years ago. Remember the Body Shop? Like, that started off as an ethical thing about not testing on animals, but then her workers tried to set up a union. They bust the union. They sacked a bunch of staff because, you know, it wasn't part of their business model for them to have a union. And, you know, so like, I guess there's all these issues about trying to run any kind of enterprise under capitalism, which leads to the final question, which is shareholders. I mean, the problem is in modern, like, I think Thatcher had the popular, what's it called, like, you know, the shareholder thing, like, when she denationalised. It's really funny in Microsoft Word, like, you can't say renationalised. It automatically autocorrects to denationalised. I don't like pure ideology. Anyway, like when she privatised British Water, and then they were selling, you know, shares. It was like £5 each or something. Everyone can become a shareholder. You know, it was like popular capitalism. That was it, popular capitalism. But obviously now it's just run by massive private equity firms, and like, I know people who buy, like, which is the structure of the stock market. Like, these are multi-million pound companies. Like, they can't survive on me having 5 shares, you having 10 shares, you having, you know, like, that's not what they need. They need massive investments of capital to sustain, to grow, to whatever. And so they look to hedge funds, private equity funds. And so I know people, say with oil companies, they might buy a share so you can go to the AGM of the company and sort of put your hand up and go, Shalla doing X, Y, and Z, you know, cause trouble, and you get thrown out by the security guards, which is great. I think that's a good thing to do. But there's no way that you can buy enough shares to challenge some of these US hedge funds. I mean, they have billions of dollars flowing through them, you know, sort of. So, like, I don't think that there's a route in that way in terms of being able to fundamentally change things. There's also an issue, for instance, there was a big push in the 90s to put workers on the like to give workers shares. So General Motors did that. They were like, rather than a wage increase, why don't we just give you shares in the company? They'll always go up, worth it, and then you're a shareholder. But then that creates a psychology amongst the workers of like, well, we've got to keep the shares up, haven't we? I mean, like if you go on strike, the shares go down, that's your money, you're losing money. So you go from being a worker fighting for your wages to a shareholder worrying about your stock portfolio of the company that you work for. And it creates a bad psychology in your head, I think, where you're sort of ingrained in the logic of what that private company is trying to do. So I guess I'm very wary about these kind of proposals around that. I think we should socialise industry. I think it should be run democratically. I don't think important businesses should be in the private sector. I think supermarkets, anything where we can point to it and say people need this to live. I don't think it should be in the private sector making profit. I think there's a fundamental contradiction between production for social need and what humans need to live and making profit out of it. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you can make profit out of something and provide it, but most of the time it causes massive problems. It causes, go back to the housing at the beginning of the talk. I mean, housing in this country is largely privatised now, thanks to Right to Buy and so on, and it's unaffordable. But obviously, conversely, people want a house because that might be your pension. It's also something to pass on to your kids. I mean, that's not a bad thing to want to do. I mean, it's not like people are horrible homeowners, whatever. They're also worried about the future and they want some security. But yeah, it also means that, people can't get on the housing ladder, it's expensive. There's this weird thing where people are kind of waiting for their parents to die so they can get a house. That's not nice. That's not a nice way of, oh, come on, Dad, whatever. That's not there must be a better way of living, I'm not sure. But yeah, I guess that would be my sort of, thought on those things.
Great. So, do we have any last dying questions?
Very quick one.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting what you're saying about, that things that are a social necessity shouldn't be privatised. I'm interested about how far you take that, because there is an argument to be made there for cultural capital. Particularly, I think there's this sort of, particularly, for example, current welfare cluster. If you are disabled or if you're poor, you should live a fundamentally intellectually and culturally unenriched life.
Yeah.
Actually, if you spend money going to the cinema, that's not an essential.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know, because you look at councils that are cutting libraries because they go, well, it's libraries or collecting the bins.
Yeah.
But, I'm just interested in how far you would take that in terms of culture and enrichment of life more generally.
Yeah.
Okay, and then perhaps if after that question, if you want to conclude, but also maybe if you could tell us where we could get the book and anything that is, maybe some Easter eggs, the things that we've not talked about.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. God, what a great ending. Okay, I'll finish on this. Yes. I call myself a Marxist in the sense I'm interested in class and how that antagonism works out and analysis of capitalism in that way. I'm also a humanist, in the sense, I think, I don't get why we've accepted this world where we have worthy and unworthy people, where some people, just because they had a business idea or they worked hard, again, even that language, working hard, the immigrant cleaner that comes into the office after everyone else has left to tidy it up, she or he or whatever works hard, but obviously it's not a job that's going to get them very rich. So I think, you have to challenge your own language around those kind of things. But yeah, I think everyone should have a good life. Every human being who's born on this planet should have a good life. It should be culturally enriching, intellectually enriching. It should be, I'm not saying it won't be complicated. We'll always have heartbreak. We'll always have problems, whatever. But we have the means to be able to provide for everyone in a way which is sustainable within planetary boundaries. That's my fundamental argument. And I think the way that disabled people are being treated under capitalism is an example of, the worst bits of humanity and the way we organise society. The Nazis called disabled people useless eaters. That was their phrase for them, because they called them that because they were, so they couldn't work. and only work was important. If you can work, you must work, and you must be productive, and you must, whatever. I mean, I'm in favour of people working. I think work is important, and whatever. But yeah, it should be 15 hours a week, or so, it's like we should be reducing it. We should be democratising it. We should be making it egalitarian. We should be making sure it's well paid until we abolish money, which is also in the book. That's what I think we should be doing. And I think if at the moment you're in a situation where you are unable to work, I really hate the idea, and it's such a Victorian idea. It's this like, well, sure, fine, we'll give you some money so you don't starve, but that's it, It's like, when you see homeless people on the streets and they've got like a mobile phone, and someone's like, you've got a mobile phone, you're homeless. It's like, oh God, what do you want from people? Like, you sort of want people to have absolutely nothing and just die in a ditch or something. So yeah, I think again, it's part of the human renaissance that we need to have. We need to be much clearer about everyone having a good standard of life. I think Elon Musk should have a good standard of living, not the one he's got at the moment. I think he should have all his money taken from him. He probably needs a lot of therapy and help. I don't think he's a really mentally happy man. But everyone should have a good, a way of living on the planet. You can get this book anywhere. Is it here? There's copies here. There's copies online as well in bookshops, bad bookshops like Amazon, or good bookshops as well, like more ethical kind of like ones that are available online. And so if you want some more copies, there's some available here. The Easter egg, linking back with the thing I just, thank you for that great final question set up. Empathy. I want to talk about empathy just for the final minute or so, because I think, it's a book on planning the economy. Why are you talking about empathy? I've got a whole section in here on human nature, because I think we have to challenge that, because people are just like, humans are inherently selfish, whatever. Like my point about human nature in the book is, human nature is everything humans do. Yeah, okay, everything we do. War is human nature, so is peace. Being suspicious of your neighbour is human nature, so is loving your neighbour. Like everything we do is human nature. The question is what societies do we live in that encourage this behaviour versus that behaviour? And I think that's an important thing. I think people can be quite selfish under capitalism because we live in a society which encourages, a dog-eat-dog kind of mentality. And, I'm like, if I don't get mine, if you're getting yours and I'm, then I'm losing out. And so I think, a whole section on human nature, but linked to that is also the argument around empathy. And I kind of raise this only because Elon Musk, who I just mentioned, had a thing a couple of weeks ago where he said the greatest weakness of Western civilization is empathy, which is what the Nazis said. That is a Nazi concept that empathy weakens you. You need your strength must be in being able to see a fellow human annihilated and feeling nothing, or even feeling that it's a glorious act. That's the fascistic Nazi kind of mindset, and you can see that embedded in. I mean, if you're on social media and some refugees drown in the channel, you're like, good, they should be coming here anyway. It's complete destruction of humanity. I just quote. So this is an Easter egg. So it's not going to be Easter egg because I'm telling it to you. But anyway, very quickly, at the Nuremberg trials, when the Nazis were on trial for their war crimes and so on, the US Army paid a psychologist, Captain G.M. Gilbert, and they sent them along to interview them and speak to them and watch them during the trial, see how they reacted to things, And he concluded in his report, he said, "In my work with the defendants, I was searching for the nature of evil, and I now think I have come close to defining it. It is a lack of empathy. It's the one characteristic that connects all the defendants, a genuine incapacity to feel with their fellow people. Evil, I think, is the absence of empathy." So my point is that lack of empathy runs deep in the modern world. It is fostered by prejudice and hate, and it is there to divide us from our common humanity. And so my point in this book is that, as yes, we can talk about political strategy and we can talk about meetings and demonstrations and slogans. Those are all very important. But we need to, particularly in the current context, fight for a really radical concept of humanity where even if you might not, you might be concerned about various things that are going on, we have to accept that everyone has a right to a good standard of living, refugees and so on, everyone, disabled people. And if we lose that, and I think we already have lost that argument to a degree, but unless we can win back and make gains and challenge that notion, then we will always be stuck in this exploitative kind of oppressive society. So for me, I think the psychological aspect of what we're trying to do is almost as important as some of the political things we're trying to do.
Excellent. I think that's fantastic.